A very good afternoon to you, and thanks for joining us on television on the program Africa Discourse on independent television. My name is Evan Sunokoge. Now, today is the much awaited day 4, talking about June 12 in Nigeria, and perhaps we're going to be stretching it forward on this program today in Africa. Talking about Africa, democracy, and of course, politics in Africa. We all understand what transpired on this day in 1993, talking about June 12 in Nigeria, how MKO Abiola was announced the winner of the 1993 presidential election, and of course how that election was annulled. And one good thing about the election, one good thing about the June 12, one good thing about the date, talking about June 12, 1993, is the fact that even if that day has come and gone, the remembrance of that day will go on in a very, very long time in our political development, and of course in our political history in Nigeria, and perhaps in the political history of the African continent. Good ones know that the Nigerian president, the Nigerian government has recognized that day as Democracy Day. So every June 12 of every year in Nigeria, we will celebrate, and of course we will mark it. And the president was on television this morning reassuring Nigerians, and Nigerians at home and Nigerians in diaspora, that all hope is not lost for our nation, and perhaps all hope is not lost for the African continent. Well, today on the program African Discourse, we're going to be looking at democracy in Africa, Nigeria's democracy in focus. And when we talk about democracy, we are talking about a system of government that people go to the polls, and of course they elect their leaders, they elect their presidents, they elect their Senate presidents, and of course they elect their Speaker of House of Representatives. The House of Representative members have been elected, and of course we also understand that democracy is one of the best system of government as far as governance is concerned. But how come that most recently we've seen some few nations in Africa that military junta, military coup took place? The big question that we are tempted to ask in that direction is it that military government is coming back into governance in African system of government? Take, for example, countries like Sudan, where we have Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who is fighting against Dagalo to take the soul of the northern Sudan. We have the military rulership there in Sudan. And of course, we also have the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, where we have Ibrahim Ghali, who is also the military ruler there, the military head of state in that country. Just as we have Azali Aswamani in Comoros, who is also the military head of state in that country. Also in Burkina Faso, we understand that Ibrahim Traoré is also there. I think he's about the youngest head of state now in Africa, and of course the youngest head of state in the world. We also have in Mali, where we have Colonel Assimi Goïta, who is also a military head of state. Then also Macky Sall is also a military head of state in Senegal. All these nations are nations on the continent of Africa. So the big question we ask is, how come that these countries have decided to allow them to be ruled by the military? That's one big question on one side. But back to the topic today, looking at democracy in Africa, and of course Nigeria's democracy in focus. We're so privileged to have one guy, you know, that personally I've keenly taken interest in him and the way he has started following political tenets in Nigeria, politics in Nigeria. I'm talking about Mr. Peter Okungwawa, who is one of the coordinators of Test House Tutorials Gorilla Brain in Benin City in Nigeria, and of course one of the coordinators of Cavalry Crown Academy, and one guy that is beginning to make incursions into Nigerian politics. Mr. Okungwawa, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you, Evans. Good afternoon, viewers.
All right, so let's start from democracy. How would we want to describe democracy in Africa? What's your perception? What are your impressions about democracy in Africa?
We look at the origin of democracy from the Greeks. And you see that the Greeks essentially situated it around their value system and their culture. And what bettered what you rather would call a representative type of democracy today was nothing but the surge in population. As it were initially, those from the Athenian, the other smaller community within the Greek area could come together and discuss their future and discuss their way of life and what amendments needed to be made. But as population grew, it gave birth to a representative type, wherein everybody's voice couldn't be heard in the parliament no more. So it was more or less like a case of you from Athens, send your representative. You from this other region, send your representative. That gave birth to the representative type of democracy. That's democracy at its core. Okay. And I dare to say that why democracy has been credited to have developed from Greeks, we also had a form of democracy sprouting up from somewhere in Nigeria here in the eastern region, where we practiced basically what we call the village system of government, where everybody's voice was heard, where we also analogously practiced what they call a gerontocracy, a system where the older person presided, but the youth had their place, therefore, and the also title holders had their place. Fast forward to today. What have we made of democracy in Africa? I dare to say that democracy in Africa today doesn't exist. And even if it does, it has no clear boundaries, it has no clear definition, it has no clear scope. It's basically more like a scalar quantity, no amplitude, no direction, no focus. Because democracy as it were is not our thing. So even if we're going to take the idea of democracy, we should have situated it around our value system and our traditional institutions for it to have meaning, for it to have a value, lest it was going to elude us as time went on. And that's basically what has happened today. Harold Lasky defined democracy as the madness of the many for the interest of the few. Abraham Lincoln saw it as government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I dare to say that the Abraham Lincoln definition is obtainable today in the West, while the Harold Lasky definition is obtainable today in Africa, where many of us go mad and go gaga because elections have come, and in the end, only a few persons get to benefit what is called the dividends of democracy. Democracy, when you look at it, ought to be defined within the ambit of nothing else other than the response of the poor, the talakawa, the least vantage in the society, how they respond to it. Then you could say you have a democratic system of government. So if that is absent in the case of Nigeria, which it has been since 1999, it's been copiously absent from our political structure. We cannot say we're practicing democracy. At best, we could say we have a Nigeria type or an Africa type of democracy, wherein the questions that will follow is its scope, its depth, its limits, its boundaries. That becomes another discussion. Okay. Now, in Nigeria, for you to know that we're practicing democracy, what happened to the local government autonomy? Without the local government autonomy, we cannot practice democracy, because democracy basically is about resource allocation and the life of the people as it goes down to the grassroots. And without local government financial autonomy, and even its delineation, I dare to say, we can never say we have democracy in this part of the world. Okay.
All right. So you see that you have, fully said that it appears we have our own type of democracy in Africa.
At best.
Now, a while ago, you also said that the way we practice democracy in Africa is probably different because our culture, our way of life is not taken into cognizance. Now, are we saying that if we are to go back to maybe a system of government, which kind of government do you think will probably suit our own kind of people, taking into cognizance who we are, our culture, our traditions, and of course our way of life and all that?
In the 15th century, when Rode de Sequeira visited the Asian Benin Kingdom, after which his son Afonso de Aveiro visited, they noted that we had evolved a system of governance for ourselves. It was a monarchy. And we didn't even have what they call absolute monarchy. We had a constitutional monarch. The great Oba or the Ogisos then also had checks. The Council of Elders considered the checks. We had a system of judiciary, which was adjudicated alongside our traditional value system, the ATR as it were. I'm not advocating for ATR today modern governance, but there were certain values that were embedded in our way of life then that we should have brought alongside alongside this modernity that we're trying to approach. And if you look at it from foundation, what the Africans were best at practicing in view of their religion, their religious sentiments, in view of their worldview, was a republican system of government. It thrived very well in Nigeria until we bettered this thing we call democracy. When you look at the history of Nigeria, when it came to a republic, essentially, a republic as we practice in Nigeria was the truest form of federalism, where every region had quasi-autonomy. But it was never really spelled out in that order. But every region had a quasi-autonomy to the extent that the political parties that flourished in the First Republic in Nigeria were regionally based. You had the NCNC managing its affairs in the Eastern Nigeria. You had the NPC managing its affairs in the Northern Nigeria. You had the AG, the Action Group, managing its affairs in the Western Nigeria, with the UPN trying to hold power at the central. We should have continued with that. And alongside, we should have also developed a system of government wherein what God had deposited in this region belonged to those people of those regions, and not beginning to claim this oneness that is not working today. What actually it will mean to say we are practicing a democracy like the American type of democracy that is very liberal in its scope. The English have a type of democracy even when they have a monarchy in office. Even when they have a monarchy today, they have a type, because the parliament is where they now democratize their way of life and their choices as they mean. Because in modern trend, you couldn't carry on with those ancient practices, as it were. The African continent was not allowed even to develop. From the 15th century to the late 18th century, slave trade took away the workforce, the youth base of this continent, and depleted it. So the extent that many of the countries in Africa were named after products that were initially the reason the white men came, until they decided to steal into our political structure. Ghana was called the Gold Coast because of the abundance of gold that were found there. Liberia was called the Salt and Pepper Coast because most of the salts from the African continent were gotten from there. Nigeria was called what, sir? The Slave Coast. Yeah. Because most of the slaves were gotten from Borno in Calabar here. At the end of the day, they destroyed this system, and our earliest nationalists did not know that the right thing to have been done was to go back and build from the history and the past. History is not history. It's only in Nigeria that people don't understand the importance of teaching young people history. It's a tool with which you construct a present and a future. Without history, you cannot construct a present and a future. If you are going to make amends for whatever problem we're having today, is that you took cognizance of the challenges that it posed in the past, and you begin to forecast a future for it. Now, why did we throw history away?
Yeah, but from the way you're talking now, it appears that are you trying to blame we Africans for accepting the democracy that we accepted, that we're practicing today, or for the colonial masters giving democracy to us?
We had no business accepting this type of democracy that we took hook, line, and sinker. It will work given the value systems of people. The value system of an average American today enables democracy to thrive because it's liberal. In America today, Obama dared to contest and won election because they have a heightened level of liberalism underscoring that democracy. Right, in Nigeria, a Benin guy cannot go to Lagos and contest election and win. So we're not there yet. We shouldn't have left behind the regional sentiments and the republic that made us better people.
But let's take our mind back into history now. Let's see the pre-colonial era, whereby in the eastern parts of the country, in the Igbo land, we understand that there were more or less like a kind of maybe democratic problems there with the way they had their leadership and all that. A situation whereby the society was best described as egalitarian society. They didn't really have a particular head, as it were. You know, every home had its head, every quarter had its head and all that. But unlike against some other settings, take for example like the Benin Kingdom, that the Oba reigned supreme. Now this was not only in Nigeria, even somewhere in Ghana and even in Togo, we had that same system of governance too. Now, if we have this situation on the ground, don't you think we also had an issue with the way we were ruling ourselves, even before our colonial masters came and introduced democracy to us?
I do not think we had problems as such, because even the white continent where we took democracy hook, line, and sinker from, they had challenges and it evolved over time. What you had in practice today in America wasn't so in the beginning. It modified along times and along the fashion of times, as it were. If the African continents were allowed to own their thing, along the line, they would have fine-tuned those issues. You made mention of the Igbo system of government that was basically described as egalitarian. Yeah. Yes, it was egalitarian to the extent that the compound heads, the fathers in every compound, had a role to play in societal build-up. And that was the best form of government, because from the meetings he attended at Village Square, he goes home and administers the thoughts of every person that they convoluted together and are brought together by reason of interlocutory sections with other men who had come to represent their homes or their clans. And they had the head. And that head they have is simply looking like the kind of democracy that America has today. They call it a loose federalism, where states in America are independent within America.
Yeah.
Laws in Minnesota, for example, don't obtain in California. They have different, because those states were built along their values. Those laws were built along their values. Do you know there are still states in America today that criminalizes homosexuality and same-sex?
Why some other states support it?
Other states support it.
Yeah.
That's because when they were building the American federalism, it put into account the values of the people. It must not be truncated. If it's going to evolve and develop, it's going to take the course of time. But before that time, we can live together under what you call a loose federalism. The president of America does not hold sway over states in America. In fact, he has to play ball with state governors to be able to implement federal policies even at those state level. That was exactly what the Igbos practiced.
Okay.
The head of the village, who was called the Okpara, did not have absolute power. He mediated in disputes and worked with other organs of government.
Yeah, that's what we're saying. He didn't have absolute power, Mr. Okungbawa, unlike someone like the Benin Kingdom, that the Oba had absolute power. Don't you think that was an issue on its own?
The Benin Kingdom, the Oba Benin, the Ogisos as they were, did not also have complete absolute power. Don't forget, some were dethroned by their chiefs. Some, the council rose against
but let's look at after the
promoted.
Ogisos now. After the Ogisos, because one of the best ways to actually describe Benin Kingdom is after the Ogisos, when we started having the Obas and all that. When the Obas started reigning, they had absolute powers.
Let's start from Eweka the first, the son historically of Oromia. He didn't have absolute power. He didn't. He willed a reasonable portion of power that could be described as absolute, but he didn't have absolute power because his palace chiefs kept him in check. They didn't allow him to do certain things that he would have wished he had absolute power to do. In fact, the only part of this country where absolute monarchical system of government was practiced was in the north. In the Yoruba kingdom, for example, they had evolved a system of checks and balance where the Alafin could not wield absolute power because he was checked by the Council of Elders, or Yomesi, headed by the Baale. He was also, those were also checked by the judiciary, which was the Ogboni fraternity, the Ogboni courts, as it were. They didn't wield absolute power. Even the Are Onakakanfo, who was the general, the military general, had restrictions to the extent he couldn't even stay in the town. He had to stay in the outskirts of the town because he posed a threat to the sovereignty of the Alafin.
All right.
Africans had it beautiful. Nigerians had it beautiful. How come we threw it off and took democracy hook, line, and sinker? Is it working today as it is working in America?
We'll come to that.
I'm sure there's local government autonomy in America.
We're going to come to that to see one of the reasons why democracy is not working in Nigeria. Now, just like what we said a while ago, that about 6 nations now, 6 countries on the continent of Africa, are being ruled by military juntas. We have Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Comoros, and also Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. Sudan is also there, and also one of their nations. Now, what is going on? Democracy is the most popular system of government now worldwide, but we find that military, rulership, military leadership seems to be creeping into the African continent. What do you think is going on?
To correct an impression, democracy is not so popular. In the whole of the Arab nations, they reject democracy.
Yeah, but they're also having
in the Asian continent. In the Asian continent, democracy is not so popular.
Them on that.
In the Eastern Europe, democracy is not so popular. You get me? The problem you have today is that the institutions of democracy have not been strengthened over time in these African countries where the military have taken over power. Let's go to January 15, 1966, when Major Chukwuemeka Nzegu Kaduna sacked the parliamentary system of government of Alhaji Tafawa Balewa. He sacked a Republican government, a government that was duly of the people. Why? The army had used, amongst other reasons, widespread corruption, the issue of tribalism, nepotism, and favoritism. These offended the army. And the last straw that broke the camel's back, when you looked into the reasons of their incursion in politics in Nigeria, was that the structure that made the army what it is, which is the organogram, its rank and file, was distorted by the civilian government, who could not appreciate military build-up. So when I become head of state, for example, I begin to promote policies, or as prime minister, I begin to promote policies that favor military personnel from the northern region because I am from the north. And at the end of the day, The person who is a junior officer is not paying obedience to the person who's a senior officer because that one is from the eastern region. That was the last straw that broke the camel's back, that brought about our military incursion in our politics. Fast forward to today, these countries in Africa you've mentioned that are experiencing this thing, I don't have to be there to tell you that the institutions of democracy was not strengthened by the civilian governments that prompted them to take over. Because a democratic government, a truly democratic government, is so popular and so accepted that the military will be afraid to cross their boundary. Because this time will be waging war against everybody. Now, it's people fighting for interest, people fighting for their own cause. Now, if the institutions of democracy were that strengthened, you know that this government in power is delivering on the tenets, on the benefits of democracy to the people. As a military officer, even when you wield the barrel of the gun, you'll be very careful how you use it.
That's correct.
So the failure of our African leaders are appreciating a type of democracy that could work for us, that could carry our people along, is what results in this kind of
military incursion.
Yes, today. That's what you have. Basically, everybody knows that a popular government is a threat to any intruder, to any person who wants to commit an offense that may be termed treasonable felony. It's a threat to them. But when you know that this same so-called democratic government does not have the love and the support of the people, courtesy of the fact that they are not delivering on the dividends of democracy, then it could prompt the greed in you to sack them out of office. Exactly what happened in January 15th, 1960 in Nigeria. Okotiebo was accused of masturbating the national wealth of Nigeria.
All right, so afraid from Philas now. I think this is all we can take on the program today. Sincere apologies. I thought we were going to have plenty of time so that we'll begin to calm it down, bring it down to Nigeria, and also describe the system of democracy that we have in Nigeria. Also look at the issues, the problems in Nigeria, democratic features, and see how far we can go with all these issues in our democracy. I want to say a very big thank you to you, Mr. Peter Okumbowa, for finding time to come, and happy Democracy Day. I hope you are celebrating. All right, so on this same time and next week on the same show, Africa Discourse, my name is Evan Sunohuge. Thanking you for watching. Bye-bye.